Free your mind.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard. Welcome to yet another edition of the Pan-African Pyramid Show that happens here every Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. My name is Andrew Irumba Katusabe, your speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, on 31st of August, we will be having our 7th Pan-African Pyramid Global Awards that will be happening here at Fairway Hotel. And I'd like to invite all of you to come and be part of this history. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to have all of you here so that we are able to celebrate our achievements together. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to understand the causes of conflicts and their negative impact to African development. The continent of Africa has been highly susceptible to intra and interstate wars and conflicts. This has actually prompted this insinuation that Africa is home of wars and instability. Most pathetic about these conflagrations is that they have defied any meaningful solution, and their negative impacts have retarded growth and development in Africa, while an end to them seems obscure. What then are the causes of these unending wars in Africa? How have they weakened cohesion, unity, and the potential development of the African continent? What can we do to overcome this monster? Since the 1960s, series of civil wars had taken place in Africa. Examples include Sudan in 1995 to 1990, Chad in 1996 to 1985, Angola since 1974, Liberia 1980 to 2003, Nigeria 1967 to 1970, Somalia 1999 to 1993, and Burundi, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone 1991 to 2001. But apart from civil wars, Africa has also witnessed a number of intermittent border and interstate conflicts, notable among which are the following: Nigeria-Cameroon dispute over Bakassi Peninsula since the 1970s, Algeria-Morocco conflict over the Atlas Mountains area in October 1963, Eritrea-Ethiopian crisis between 1962 and 1979, Somalia-Ethiopia dispute of 1964 to 1978 over the Ugandan desert region, Chad and Libya crisis of 1980 to 1982, Kenya and Somalia border war of 1960 to 1967, in which Somalia aimed at recovering its lost territories, including the northern frontier district of Kenya, Tanzania-Uganda crisis 1978 to 1979. Conflicts in Africa may be said to have been caused by a multiplicity of factors, such as arbitrary borders created by the colonial powers, heterogeneous ethnic composition of African states, inept political leadership, corruption, negative effect of external debt burden, and poverty, among others.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the impact of Africa's, the causes of conflict and their negative impact on the Africa's development cannot be overstated. Like Comrade, you have already mentioned, the conflicts, majority of the conflicts that we have here on the African continent are as a consequence of artificial boundaries. Kenya has had issues with Uganda on Mijingo Island. Cameroon has had issues with Nigeria. The Igbos were fighting with the rest of Nigerians simply because of these artificial borders. The issues between Cameroon, South and North Cameroon are also as a consequence of the artificial borders. We have had the issue of religions. these religious, the Catholicism, the Anglicanism, the Islam, were created again by the invaders. And as a result, people have fought wars on the African continent simply because they do not share the same religious affiliation. We have had Muslims, even up to now in Nigeria, battling what they call the Kafiris, people who do not subscribe to Islam. And it is not only there, we have had the similar situation in Somalia. We have had the same in parts of the Sahel region. And we have also had even similar things, especially during the infancy of colonialism, even on the East African part. Therefore, and these religious affiliations for crying out loud were not created by the African person, because ours, our indigenous ones, were brutalized. They were described as being archaic, and they said that they had a superior God who up to now was partitioned. Either this God is Catholic or must be approached through Catholicism. This particular God that was brought by a white man must be approached through Anglicanism. This particular God that the foreigner brought must be approached through Seventh-day Adventism or the Islam. Now, these differences in religious affiliations are at the root of the conflicts that we have in Africa. And actually, when you look at the paper presented to the peer review commission in South Africa around 2008, 2010, by His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, about what the African problem is, he points out that the problem of differences, the wars that we have fought as the African continent, as a consequence of differences in religious affiliations. Now, this, therefore, is one of the major causes of conflicts on the African continent. The education system, which was equally brought by the white man, the colonialist, is also another reason for the conflicts that we have. In Nigeria, for instance, the Igbos were given a specific and what they would call a special treatment. And in Nigeria, the Igbos are the most highly educated. That is why, for instance, later, they looked at themselves and they said they could not be part and parcel of the bigger community called Nigeria, because they assumed that their privileged position of this, which education system is also a problem. The Fulani, for instance, are not as educated as the Igbos. So the differences, therefore, the different treatments, treatment that was given to the Africans by the white man has also been a cause, because the Biafra War was not caused by any other thing. The Igbos simply looked at themselves as being superior to any other tribe. And this is not just unique to Nigeria. It is everywhere. It is everywhere on the African continent. The democracy, type of democracy that was handed down to us, which was foreign up to now, which we seem to praise, the benchmarks of democracy are simply not ours, and we have been struggling. We are always validated and judged according to the tenets that are embedded in the so-called Western democracy, and as a consequence, Africa has been on fire, either as a result of the so-called rigged elections, or as a result of the type of democracy that has not been implemented as per the tenets set down by the person who handed the type of democracy to us. And even upon departure, that is if he departed anyway, when the white man left the same type of democracy, which he is perpetuating through imperialism. And this type of democracy is also a recipe for disaster, and it has caused a number of conflicts on the African continent. Mr. Speaker, sir,
Yes, sir.
we have the problem immediately after the World War, the 1940s.
World War II?
Yeah, especially the World War II, where America, having used the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, having depleted, and Europe having fought the war and gotten depleted completely, the Marshall Plan, which was actually headed by the victorious American government, created the Bretton Woods institutions. These Bretton Woods institutions, Mr. Speaker, sir, which include International Monetary Fund and World Bank, are a disaster and a source of conflict. The coups on the African continent, the assassinations of the presidents, including the whole range of the Kwame Nkrumahs, that crop that died, the Olympios, that died, the Ben Beras, who died, the Patrice Lumumbas, who died as a consequence of CIA ganging up with some other hitmen, is because the institutions of the Bretton Woods institutions of IMF and World Bank wanted to see to it up to now that what they tell the lesser, what they call the lesser countries, especially the African continent, is what is respected. Short of that, whoever purposes come up with a different mode of economic development is either sabotaged. If you are not sabotaged by way of assassination, the economy will fail you, and they have done the same in Zimbabwe. They have done the same they are doing the same in Uganda, if you didn't know, and they have also almost done the same on the African continent. Ask yourself, is it by DNA that African countries cannot manage to marshal economic development decade in, decade out? The answer is simple. The Bretton Woods institutions have got macro policies that will not allow any African country, not actually African country only, but also even countries in other parts of the world. Venezuela is suffering as I talk now. The Comrade Maduro, and I was there, I'm not telling you things which I have not seen with my naked eyes and internalized. The suffering that the people of our brothers and sisters in Venezuela are going through is simply because Venezuela is bestowed with natural resources which the American compradors and the conglomerates are interested in unfairly exploiting. So these Bretton Woods institutions, therefore, like I have told you, the economic macro policies of the IMF and the World Bank, and I even wonder why they call it the World Bank, because truth be told, this is the Washington Bank. And the Washington Bank, which has actually weaponized the dollar, and the reason as to why we are having conflicts between the so-called NATO, which is actually America, and Russia, is simply because Russia and China have proposed through the BRICS alternative economic governance. And that war in Ukraine, the war everywhere, is all about economic policies and the weaponization of the dollar, which the BRICS states want to go out of, and they are succeeding. Therefore, it is not restricted there, but it is also affecting Africa in the sense that the moment you are not economically empowered, which the Bretton Woods institutions will never want Africa to achieve, you will always be vulnerable, and vulnerability includes conflicts. So, Speaker, sir, imperialism is alive and well. The pretense that the white man went is nothing else but a pretense. The truth of the matter is that he instead came in the most vicious of ways, and although you cannot see him with your naked eyes, he comes in macroeconomic policies, he comes in political gerrymandering, and also he comes in different social related circumstances, including imposing on you the LGBTQ, which in essence is purposed to reduce the population of Africa and also to affect not only your fertility, but also your productive capacities.
I have also seen that feasting in Ginger, that annual feasting in Ginger at the source of the Nile.
Oh, there is this one. They will always support very bizarre things. And don't get worried that even when they come up with things which don't make sense and you want to challenge them, instead of engaging you in academic issues, instead of challenging you on principle, they will want to show you that they are better than you. If they are not going to sabotage you, if they are not going to frustrate you economically, they will send in their jackals. They will carry out all sorts of things, including assassinations. Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore,
As you wind up,
effects are the following. We have got increased perpetual poverty. We have discrimination of all kinds. We have got miseducation instead of education. We have got growing dictatorship. We have a cynic cleansing on the African continent. We have got increased disease burden. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, very sad, but also very true, that we are on the increase to ideological bankruptcy, whereby our ability to think positively and critically, to challenge and manage what is actually challenging us is on the decline, because we have got educated people who are actually miseducated, and they are the ones in the governance of our republic. Way forward, Mr. Speaker, sir. The way forward is to reinvigorate our institutions, including African Union, with all the inherent institutions within, like the African Development Bank, like science and technology, like peace and security, like the social aspect of African Union, such that we ensure that we inculcate in the population of Africa the ideological independence to make it very critical for the youth, especially, to grow with the ability to think beyond the box, and also to emphasize the learning in order to learn for purposes of overcoming the challenges that are in the majority externally created. I thank you so much, Mr.
Good evening, everybody. As a teacher, I would like to go through the process of explaining to my listeners some of the main reasons why there is conflict in Africa. Now, he mentioned, the former speaker mentioned the colonial masters, and I'm also going to say the same thing. Colonialism. Before colonialism, like the previous speaker said, we had societies, we had religion, we had our own traditional religions, we had our own borders, and we had our own conflicts. And like he said, we were resolving them. But with this new conflict that has come in, the same people who divided us during the colonial times are the same people fueling the conflict. Now, I'm going to go through a list of some of the main issues that cause conflict in Africa. Like I said again, my brother said, colonial borders. When during the Berlin Conference, even before the Berlin Conference, people were already, European powers were already fighting for occupation of different African regions. Now, they would come regardless of what tribe. They would say, this is my area. Then they cut a slice of Ethiopia, part of Sudan, current Kenya, and you'll realize these were areas occupied by certain tribes. So you find their Harar community was taken away. Part of them are in Ethiopia. Some of them are in Sudan. Some of them are in Somali, some of them are in Kenya. So this is the kind of greed that the colonial powers had. They did not care about our local tribes. They did not care. What do you think has been causing the conflict between Nigeria and Cameroon? The conflict between Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. The conflict between Somali, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea. Ethiopians and Eritreans are basically the same people. But they've been divided, one colonial power supporting another one supporting another one, and there's conflicts. Why do you think Somali, now, like in Kenya now, there is a huge Somali community, and they're actually Kenyans. But also, in Somalia, there's a huge Somali community, and they're Somalians. So when the colonial powers came in and divided this, it was just like a cake. Let me cut here, I'll give this to Germany. Oh, Italy comes and says, Somalia is mine, and also part of Ethiopia is mine. Cameroon has two colonial powers in one country, France and English. You meet a Cameroonian, and the first thing they will say, I'm Cameroonian, but Anglophone. We have been reduced to a point where we are identifying ourselves with the colonial powers that colonized us. Why can't
and we are proud.
Why can't there be conflicts? So as they came, the divide and rule policy that they had back then in 1700 and 1800 still applies now. It was an architectural plan that was meant to last forever. And we do not expect these same people who came and designed that to come and help us to stop conflicts. They are fueling the conflicts in Africa. The second thing that is causing a lot of conflict in Africa, natural resources. Africa is abound with natural resources every corner of Africa. And like we said, we discussed in the last meeting when we were talking about natural resources. Natural resources will be our end as Africans because everybody wants them. France, America, all of them, they want what Africa has. And they've been doing it for a very long time. And even when they said, we are giving you independence, there's never been independence because their claws are still stuck in. And they will continue to defend all those things they captured during colonialism, and they're still controlling them up to now. So we should not be misled that, oh, we have the United Nations, we have all these beautiful meetings happening in Geneva. We have the United Nations body, we have UNHCR, we have UNICEF for children. Why are you keeping a war? Why are you sustaining a war only to bring people and give them more jobs? How many people amongst us knows a relative who works for the UN? Very few. You'll be lucky if you're an African and you're working for the United Nations at a high level. So these people create a conflict. They create an organization that is supposed to stop this UN refugee, UNHCR, and all they do is employ their people to come and be observers. Right now, what is happening in Sudan? Sudan has been taken over by 3 different groups. One is the United Arab Emirates, the whole group of them, supporting a certain group, and then we have the local people. And then also, you have the United Nations, right there. What is the role of United Nations Refugee Council? What is the United Nations Peacekeeping Forces? What do? They have been talking about maintaining peace in all these conflict places. Don't you think they have enough resources?
Conflicts have only increased.
Don't you think they have enough resources to stop this? How can you have peacekeepers in your area? Like right now, Congo has peacekeepers. The full region has peacekeepers. Rwanda had peacekeepers. But what did they do? They stepped aside and watched the Hutus and Tutsis kill each other with weapons they had supplied one community. So when we talk about conflicts and stopping conflict in Africa, it's not going to stop unless we say enough is enough. And then we stop depending on natural resources only, because we have other things too. But Africa's dependence on natural resources has ignited some greed, because it's our resources are very valuable out there. And we are losing all these things because we are not manufacturing. We are not adding value to our resources. We are selling them as is, creating jobs elsewhere. All you are left to do is to become diggers, is to become potters, but you're not adding value to anything. So the industrialization period in the West, I'm talking about Europe, Americas, it happened on us. They were using our people, they were using our resources. Just a product like sugar only. And when I talk about natural resources, I'm not talking about diamonds and gold. I'm talking about even the food, maize. Like slavery, I could say started because they wanted sugar. They wanted people to work in the sugar plantations. We have sugar here. Don't you think Africans have a better solution than take sugar? But they've made sugar, I think sugar is the biggest trap. We are so dependent on things while the others are working on other things. Oh, we are only determined to find out how much is a kilo of sugar on the budget. We are importing more sugar. We are using more sugar that we have to import sugar. We are getting sugar from Brazil. We are getting sugar from India. Can you imagine? Don't we have sugar in this country, in Africa? Now, the reason I'm saying we are over-depending on natural resources at the expense of our peace, at the expense of our education, is because we let other people, we have allowed other people to come into our country and be the ones to tell us how much this costs. What is the cost of taking, like he said last week, sand? The Chinese are coming here and they're collecting sand and taking it to China. Sand. The one thing that Europe, America has destroyed is manufacturing and denied us the ability of using our own resources, because if we do use our own resources, they'll have nothing. There is no oil in America. There is no gold in Britain. There is no uranium in France. But these are the world's biggest sellers of the items I'm talking about. Where is it all coming from? They will not let us do any kind of manufacturing. Instead, they will arm small communities within areas. And if you look at the African map, only if you look at the places where there's conflicts in Africa, most of them are fuel rich, resource rich. Look at Congo. You cannot take everything from you will not in our lifetime. It's a country that keeps giving. Some things have not even been discovered. And that's why it will never have peace until all of it is done. We are depending on natural resources, and that is where they are hitting us at. these natural resources that we have is what is causing conflicts in all these places. Much as they say, oh, we are colonized, we were given independence. We were not. We are not independent. Independence from who? These are the same people who are still in our countries managing what people managed 200 years ago. And when one person in Africa starts to say anything like, we are going to unite and become Africa as one, or we are going to unite, or we are going to start processing our own oil in Africa, then it becomes a problem. Then suddenly we have a conflict in that area. Now, something that happened very recently. There is a rich man in Nigeria, Aliko Dangote.
Aliko Dangote.
Aliko Dangote,
Richest man in Africa,
has built one of the biggest oil refineries in Africa. Next week, last month, all we hear about that oil refinery is how bad of an idea it is. And for who? It's a bad idea for Britain. It's a bad idea for France. It's a bad idea for America. Because now, all those European countries that take our crude oil, they take our crude oil. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be refined
from Nigeria.
In Nigeria.
And that's a bad idea.
That's a very, very
American,
bad idea.
And therefore it should be a bad idea to Africa. Once they don't like it, it's bad for all of us.
So very soon, you're going to see people fighting him.
You're going to see war.
You're going to hear that Dangote is an Islamist something.
Yeah.
And another thing I didn't mention, religion. Christianity started in Africa. So when a group of people comes and says, we're introducing you to religion, and like my former speaker said, the former speaker said, they tell you the only way for you to get to God is by being a Catholic, by being an Anglican, by being SDA, by being all these things. All those things are being used to divide us.
They bring Muslim.
They bring Islam. Islam was introduced in Africa in the 10th century. Between the 10th century and now, maybe 200 years ago, or okay, not even 200 years ago, let's say 50 years ago, why suddenly are they putting a name, Islamist rebels, Islam insurgency? Islam has been in Africa for the longest time, from the 10th century.
ISIS.
And we've been living together with each other. But suddenly, you find Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram,
ISIS,
all these things.
Al-Qaeda.
I know this is not part of Al-Qaeda. It's not part of Africa, but you can see what happened with Iran and Iraq, with Iraq, where they took out Saddam Hussein. And the reason now we have all these checks at the airport, what happened? There was a suspicion that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. We should know when to stop this kind of ugly games. And I know we can be able. Africa is rising up with young people who are aware of these shenanigans that America and the West are putting up. They've put up, and they're doing it officially with IMF,
World Bank.
Which World Bank? Africa contributes more to the World Bank than any other. But here we are, we have the worst GDPs. You can't even say. The poorest country now, according to World Bank, is Niger. Niger has 7% of the uranium being used in the world. Congo has more.
Niger has 7% of the world's uranium.
Yes.
And it is the poorest. And
Congo.
what does America have?
Nothing. What does France have? And France has been selling that uranium to America at $200 after buying it for $3 from Niger. So you keep these people poor, but you enrich themselves. So in conclusion, I want to say we need to have a solution to this problem and not let somebody come and write to us a method of working. I like the step our President Museveni took and said, we are Africans, we will do our things. And he's encouraging a lot of manufacturing. I know Uganda, like any other country, we're struggling. Uganda is struggling in terms of having manufacturing within our borders. So we will get there. It takes one step at a time. But we should support, we shouldn't support the issue of agreeing with the West on all these solutions they are giving to a problem that they started. So in conclusion, I would say, any conflict that has come, whether religious, whether political, whether related to borders, all those things are being fueled by the West and America and other outside forces. And Africans, we should come out and say we want leaders who are going to reject this nonsense. Thank you very
Uniting Africa by force.
Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, Right Honorable Speaker, I want to kickstart with agreeing with Comrade Rugarama that it is true that many of Africa's conflicts emanate from historicity of pre-colonial times and drag on to the post-colonial times. But also, if we must stop conflicts, we must not simply look at the historical bit of it, but also start to conceptualize the broader and futuristic aspect of these conflicts, of course, with a major target of availing lasting solutions. Today's discussion, I wanted to talk about something else, but the previous speakers now partly got me delving into another article that I almost spent an entire day reading, The Hidden Truth Behind Western Prosperity. Right Honorable Speaker, the hidden truth behind Western prosperity looks at the following. What was and what is Africa's contribution towards global powers and the question of Africa's post-colonial independence versus the future of global powers? Colleagues, we must therefore come to the agreement that a peaceful and conflictless Africa automatically collapses the Western economy. People may not say it, but we do not depend on the West. The West depends on Africa. You so much dwell on the point of manufacturing, and for me, the broader aspect is, what are the priorities of African countries? If you look at all the national budgets widely, a lot of monies are appropriated towards security and purchase of war machinery. It is a top priority for many African countries. Why? Because they have been indoctrinated that in the modern world, superiority is based on war machinery, and that he who has machinery and the capacity to intimidate others also has the ability and possibility to control
and who
them.
manufactures them?
Who manufactures? The West. Who purchases? Africa. They must therefore keep you in conflict so that you heavily keep purchasing machinery,
The one who manufactures,
emptying your economy
the one who
while you boost
the one
theirs.
who manufactures the West, the one
The
who
one who
buys
Africa.
Africa, the one the guns work against.
Africa still. We are in trouble. Right, Honorable Speaker and colleagues, we must also begin to notice that a lot of things have changed over time, from pre-colonial times to post-colonial times, except one, the subjugation of Africa that has been maintained for closely 800 years. Today, I want to tell you that wars have even become technological. The West has gone ahead to manufacture algorithms to the extent that sometimes they will perpetuate war and show you it is Africans killing, yet it is not Africans that are doing that. Yeah? Implications of AI models. Yeah? That also happens. The other example I want to give you is that the world is now venturing into the manufacturing of robotics. What do we need? Iron ore and cobalt. These are not anywhere in the West. They are in Africa. They must push you into conflict. Brothers killing and massacring each other while they gather what they need, the iron ore and cobalt, to manufacture robotics. The battle now has escalated from just resources to the manufacturing of chips. When you look at the recently concluded Kenya protests, the Hind View now tells you it is not simply about Gen Zs, because someone makes a report that implicates the provision of gadgets by Huawei. Observing the social media progression, that Kenya at a certain point even makes an attempt to switch off Facebook so that to minimize the implications of the spread of the protests. And TikTok boosted it. Now you realize that as we conflict, there are beneficiaries that look on and go as far as sponsoring. Right Honorable Speaker, as a young Pan-African, I so much take interest in what do we do? What solutions do we have at hand? One, every country in Africa must start a trust fund. A trust fund so that its citizens benefit from those resources. Now, much later, if only every African country had a trust fund, we now begin to discuss the broader perspective of what we call African investments. I have heard so many people talking about foreign investments and so forth. There is nothing like foreign investments. It is a lie. What we need are African investments. Secondly, the African Union Agenda of 2063, very simply put, implementing the African Union's development blueprint, which now prioritizes peace, security, and governance. We have quite a number of regional economic communities. We need to get back to strengthening these regional communities. Right Honorable Speaker, I am not discussing IMF, World Bank, and all that kind of stuff anymore. We are instead pushing for economic empowerment of our countries. Over time, it has been proved. The biggest fund in the world is the Norwegian fund. What is in Norway? What is in Norway? People were asking, what does America have? I want to tell you what America has. It has one of the biggest mineral reserves. But they do not have... Yeah, quite well. It has very big mineral reserves.
What about the mineral well?
They do not have any. What is their source?
What are they reserving?
What are they reserving that they do not have? Comrades, I beg to submit.
Free to survey.
It's a pleasure, Mr. Speaker. I've listened to the first three speakers on today's, topic or theme generally, conflicts in Africa, the negative impact of conflicts, on Africa or the African continent. And they were very deep papers, this I must say very frankly. And I've also learned from many of the presentations that went on. And to me, it is the ongoing debate about conflicts, not just in Africa, but of course across the whole world, the whole globe. And my takeoff point for this discussion is that conflict is a global phenomenon. And I think we need to understand that it doesn't matter whether you're to the left or to the right, you're colonized or uncolonized. Of course, conflict is a very natural, phenomenon that cuts across, all ages, of course, all nations, races, and climes. And it is not because some nations were colonized, whether it was former colonialism or informal colonialism, or it was a settler colony or a trader colony, just to qualify these things for our understanding of the kind of analysis we'll be building here and there. But, conflict cuts across all nations, even the most advanced nations of the West, the United States of America, Britain, France, and Germany, do have their own dosage of conflict in terms of disagreements, in allocation of values, in terms of the distribution of resources, in terms of issues of equity and justice, in terms of the judicious use of resources, in terms of the activities of the political class, the ruling political class, vis-a-vis their interests, and of course how that interest interfaces with what you may call the foreign policy of their nation, and what sometimes we may also define as the national strategic interest of a nation. So it cuts across all climes. If you lean across to the Far East, nations like China, even India and etc., have their own challenges in terms of conflict. And let us begin with this baseline that the common denominator in nation building across all the world is conflict. And unless we look at it from that angle and we begin to understand it from that angle, we may not be able to appreciate what has happened to Africa over time. I've listened to some of the issues that were being raised here and there. And let me make some clarifications here, very, very, very important. It's true that the colonial heritage to some extent has impacted negatively in terms of the kind of conflicts we've seen in Africa. The arbitrary borders that were imposed upon African nations, the scramble and the partitioning of Africa, the creation of modern states in Africa, and how these arbitrary borders have created the kind of conflicts that we see in Africa is very normal. But also we need to note that if we do a global comparison, that Africa was not just an exception in terms of this kind of border, conflicts that happened. It cuts across all nations in world history. So Africa was not just an exception. Two, the issues of religion also are global. It's not just an African, challenge. Countries of the Asian continent, for instance, do have their own share of religion. India, for instance, to be very specific, we do know that Islam is a factor in India. Hinduism also is a factor. And of course, sometimes it results into violent confrontation. So it's not just an African challenge. But what I would like to say here very clearly, and somebody said it in his presentation, that almost all the religions of the world, the major religions of the world, including Christianity and Islam, were born in Africa. Is something else for another day in terms of discussion. So we know that they had their roots in Africa, and so religion, as a matter of fact, ought not to be a point of conflict in Africa, except that is often manipulated by the ruling class. Just some kind of vehicle to mobilize people towards violence, and of course using the people, as cannon fodder, to fuel the kind of crisis that we have in Africa. It's not really religion in this time, but of course, the manipulation of it that generates the kind of conflicts that we find in Africa. And so there's an extent to which you can hold religion to, and the kind of crisis that it generates, it creates in Africa. And the same thing also for ethnicity. Ethnicity, these are global phenomena. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when you look at global indices, and of course you look at certain indexes, and of course they're global, you don't really need to emphasize that. Our analysis should be specific about Africa to isolate what is the specific African challenge, and of course, why that has led us to where we are in terms of the kind of conflicts that we've seen in Africa. In other countries like India, for instance, of course, even China, have their own challenge in terms of ethnicity and how that can be mobilized towards violence. The same thing for the United States of America, but except that the United States of America over time has been able to manage our ethnic diversity and to mobilize ethnicity towards development. And of course, it makes a whole difference. So what is the challenge in Africa that has led to the kind of conflicts that we have in Africa since independence? And in my own view, I would like to take a look at it from the perspective of the ruling class leadership recruitment in Africa. And it takes us back to the very foundations and origins of Pan-Africanism when it all began. If you look at almost all of the founding fathers of Africa, from Kwame Nkrumah to Patrice Lumumba, and of course Julius Nyerere also, these were great outstanding Pan-Africanists. Of course, they had great vision and ideology for Africa. Of course, that clearly defined in terms of the direction they were going to move and what Africa was going to achieve over time. I agree that Western imperialism became a factor in destabilizing these leaders, almost, destroying them completely. If not, most of them were killed, using the military, coups and counter coups, repressive regimes, like what happened in the Congo Chu, Mobutu Sese Seko to topple that regime, the Patrice Lumumba, and of course, eventually he was, killed. And of course, the same thing that happened also to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and of course, and he also eventually was killed. And so I accept the fact that yes, Western imperialism played a factor in that respect. And of course, these leaders, could not actualize the kind of dreams they had initially. But look at Julius Nyerere, for instance, in Tanzania, under the Uhuru Declaration, the concept, the idea of African socialism. And of course, he was able to drive home some agenda of development to some extent. And of course, there is good evidence to show that Tanzania has been able to experience some level of development and change. The critical challenge in Africa is leadership and leadership recruitment and ideological leadership. That Africa has suffered from that challenge over time, through military regimes and counter-military regimes, that has taken place in Africa. Since independence, if you take the 1960s upward, over 40 military coups and counter-military coups in Africa, very destabilizing in terms of providing direction, in Africa. If you look at the West, of course, even countries like South Korea, of course, even countries like North Korea, even Russia, leadership is a critical factor in development. And of course, that has played out in Africa the way we see it. So, African leaders, over time lost the vision completely, the Pan-Africanist vision. And of course, it began far back in the 1960s up to the 1970s. I was happy when the other speaker mentioned the issue of Dangote in Nigeria, Leo Dangote building the biggest refinery in Nigeria, and of course, the oil crisis in Nigeria. Why do we have an oil crisis in Nigeria in the first place? That conflict in the first place, because the ruling political class in Nigeria, the contestation, that struggle over the control of oil resources in Nigeria. And of course, they're being balkanized along ethnic lines and of course, along regional lines. And of course, leading businessmen like Dangote, been able to establish a refinery in Lagos, the biggest so far in the world. But there are, Nigerian ruling political class who have established refineries overseas, some in Malta, and of course, they will prefer a situation where, look, we keep importing fuel into Nigeria that is tied to the dollar, the foreign exchange market, and that one is better. And now the situation is exacerbated by the fact that the oil resources in Nigeria, the crude oil in Nigeria has been mortgaged upward for 20 years or more. And it makes it difficult even, for Dangote to buy crude oil in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, Dangote was leaning towards Brazil to buy crude oil so that he could refine or fuel his refinery. Now, what is the problem? It's class struggle. Who controls the economy in Nigeria? Who controls what? Now, if you take any sector of the Nigerian economy, it's the same thing that you see. Politicians, the ruling class in Abuja, in Aso Rock, taking over the control of the economy, and preventing what could have been a national economic transformation. I said this the other day, that the biggest challenge with African leaders is that we cannot separate what is politics and what is economics, with the economy. In a situation where you see that the ruling political class, those who are empowered, they're the same people who control the economy, they're the same people who control the resources, whether it's the telecom industry or it's the power sector or it's the oil industry like you find in Nigeria, and of course, even some other African countries. So these are the same people who also will sit at the National Assembly to make policies in Nigeria, and of course, to come out with policies that will favor them, and the kind of policies that will push the prices up to make fabulous profit. But as prices go up through inflation, the people are impoverished on a daily basis, and of course, there's mass poverty everywhere that you can see. These conflicts are man-made, and they're class-based as the outcome of that kind of class struggle over who controls resources in Africa. To that extent, it's quite difficult for us to keep, singing this story, the story of colonialism, because that story has been overflowed, as a matter of fact. I know that some people may argue that, well, yes, this same ruling class in Africa, the political class, who at the same time are the business class, some people may argue that they are also the creation of the imperialist West. I agree with that completely. There's no doubt about it. But we should also remember that this same ruling political class in Africa do have their choices, do have their preferences. I would take Nigeria, for example. I will give you something very quickly that has really caused the kind of conflicts that we have in Nigeria since the 1980s, when Ibrahim Babangida became the president in Nigeria. It is on record that Nigeria for over 20 years or 30 years, systematically in every year, was devaluing her currency. Why? Because some experts, so they say from Harvard, told the Babangida regime that the best thing that can happen to Nigeria is to devalue the Naira, because the Naira was as strong as the dollar. And that was going to create more demand for the Naira, and of course, more export out of Nigeria, and of course, stimulate the economy, and of course, give birth to economic growth and development. It is something that has to do with our tradition, where we keep believing that, look, somebody has to be somebody's brother's keeper. There's nothing wrong with that. But it shouldn't be a slavish dependence upon your neighbor, and you expect that he should do everything for you. There's always a big brother who is rich, and all of the clan is looking up to the big brother. And nobody remembers that, look, there's something I can do in my own little way to create some level of, work for myself. This is one critical challenge with every African that I see. We don't understand what it means to create true labor and hard work. Enterprise is something that we sometimes run away from, but in little ways here and there, we can create wealth and come out of poverty, which is the root of the kind of conflicts that we have in Africa. Next to that is population management. What we're doing with marriages, what we're doing with children that we give birth to, and sometimes we don't project, and we don't think in terms of what will happen if we have more children than the resources that we have at hand, in terms of population planning and meaning. These things are very critical to development. And as much as, yes, there's a conflict that is being created by this westernization or modernization effect of Western imperialism, which we agree. But of course, there is something that we must do also in terms of taking a second look at our traditional background and our cultural backgrounds, our custom values, just like what the Greeks did. Let's begin to question our cultural roots. I don't mean in a negative sense of it, I mean in a positive sense of it.
Irumba Katusabe.
Africans. If you are to talk about conflict, we must zero it down from the point of view that conflict started way back, even pre-colonial times. We had conflicts. But what is special this time is that the conflicts that we are having are conflict of interest, tribe, and many other things that we can spell out. So if you are to see, many issues have been spelled out in the different conversations that have been brought at hand. But mainly, I want to focus on one that stands out. If you are to see, religion, partly, because if you are to see, religion is one of the biggest causes of conflict within the African continent. Muslims fighting against Christians. Recently, the Pope, the Catholic Pope, called the president of Iran, trying to tell him, you know, Israel attacked Iran on the 13th of July. So the Pope was calling the president of Iran, saying Iran should not retaliate. So it is quite interesting to see how religious leaders are involved in the politics of the world. And now, if we are to bring it in the African context, we must understand and differentiate what we need to move forward. Religiously, I cannot define myself as I'm a Catholic. I first become a Munyankore, I later become what? A Catholic. So, any statement that I have to make, I must first of all consider brotherhood, then the religious aspect comes in.
Free.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. My name is Andrew Irumba Katusebe.
Free your mind